Okay, welcome to the February meeting of the Cabinet. I'm Councillor Peri Ahmed, I'm the Leader of the Council. For the public record, we have Cabinet members present as well as senior officers. Some non-Cabinet members are also present and additional officers are also joining the meeting virtually online. If any virtual attendees wish to speak, they should indicate with the yellow hand icon and we will pick this up in the meeting. And this meeting is being streamed live and recorded by the Council for subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site. So can I please ask Cabinet colleagues to introduce themselves and state their portfolio? And when other speakers also speak, can they please introduce themselves? But can I start with you, Councillor Brabazon?
Zena Brabazon, Cabinet Member, Children's Schools and Families.
Lucia Desneves, Cabinet Member for Health, Social Care and Wellbeing.
Ruth Gordon, Cabinet Member for Placemaking and the Local Economy.
Donna Carlin, Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Services.
Emily Arkell, Cabinet Lead for Culture and Leisure.
Ashta Over, Cabinet Member for Communities.
Sarah Williams, Cabinet Member for Housing and Planning and Deputy Leader.
Thank you. Richard, do we have any apologies?
We do. We have apologies from Councillor Chandwani and apologies from Councillor Haggard for slight lateness.
Thank you. Item 3, urgent business. There are no new items of urgent business. Item 4, declarations of interest. Can any Cabinet members indicate if they have a declaration of interest to make tonight? Okay, no declarations of interest. Item 5, notice of intention to conduct business in private, any representations received and the response to any such representation. So there were no representations received at the agenda publication stage in relation to the exempt items on the agenda. If we could please turn to the minutes, pages 1 to 20. Can we please confirm the minutes of the meeting on the 21st of January 2025 as a correct record, please? Thank you. Item 7, which is deputations, petitions and questions. There were none received. On to item 8, which is matters referred to Cabinet by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And the scrutiny budget recommendations will be considered as part of item 9. But we will now consider the report of the Housing Planning and Development Scrutiny Panel undertaking a review of the Housing Register. I believe this is going to be introduced by the Scrutiny Panel Chair for Housing, Planning and Development, and I think Councillor Worrell is online. You've got 5 minutes whenever you're ready, Councillor Worrell.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. This just came out of one of our meetings, I believe, when we were discussing future policies coming forward, and in a discussion of the allocations policy, a member of my panel put forward that it would be the panel would like to see a review kind of undertaken of the current housing waiting list, acknowledging the fact that many people have been on there for a number of years. It's quite likely that some of that long list of people now have different circumstances and the list is out of date. So it was just a request to undertake a review as part of that, and as part of the review of the allocations policy. And also there was kind of a desire for there to be a range of communications undertaken so that people could be reached, and maybe to have some in-person provision as well, so that people could kind of update their status. And I believe that it's now been confirmed that that is happening, so should be fairly uncontroversial. That's all from me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Worrell. I'm going to ask Councillor Williams to respond to the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Worrell as well, and for your recommendations, which are wholeheartedly accepted. I mean, it's part of the allocations, new allocations, adopting a new allocations policy to consult everybody on the housing register, and those it were going to be quite comprehensive questions which will be asked. And also, as part of the consultation, once we launch it, we would like quite a lot of in-person events around that as well. So really take on board those comments, and perhaps it would be good if we could get some view during the consultation from the panel, if that works time wise. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williams. So do any Cabinet colleagues have any questions on the scrutiny report for Councillor Worrell? It's pretty straightforward. Okay. Do Cabinet members have any questions for Councillor Williams on her response to the scrutiny recommendations? Okay. Does anyone else have any questions on this report? Councillor Cooley-Harrison? No. Okay. Okay, so if we can now move to recommendations proposed by the scrutiny panel, do we all agree? Agreed. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Worrell.
Thank
So if we can move to item 9, which is the 2025 to 26 budget and the 2025 to 2030 medium-term financial strategy report. If I can ask Councillor Carlin to please introduce the report.
Thank you, Leader. Haringey is a borough rich in diversity, creativity and talent, but it's also a borough where life expectancy drops 8 years from west to east, and where levels of deprivation in some of our wards are amongst the highest in the country. Our driving ambition is to create a fairer and greener borough where everyone can belong and thrive. And it's within these parameters that our budget is set. After successive changes to the funding formula from 2010, Haringey has lost circa about £143 million of our budget. Haringey is also still considered to be an outer London borough for funding purposes, although interestingly, an inner London borough for statistical ones, and we receive less funding than some of our inner London neighbours. In the current financial year, like other boroughs, we've seen significant increases in the demand for and cost of local services, primarily in adult social care and temporary accommodation. The cost of temporary accommodation went up 68% in London last year. While significant savings are proposed, we have worked very hard to protect the local services that our residents rely on and need. And of course, in 2025-26, we will also invest almost £1 billion to deliver many local public services. We will build hundreds of new council homes, help hundreds of people into work, fix hundreds of roads and pavements, and plant hundreds of street trees, among many other actions to make this borough a fairer and greener one. This is not
Mine's working.
testing. Yeah, this sounds okay. Okay, I can carry on with this one. Okay, I will revise slightly in the interest of the recording. In 2025-26, we will invest almost £1 billion to deliver our many public services. We'll build hundreds of new council homes, help hundreds of people into work, fix hundreds of roads and pavements, plant hundreds of street trees, and other key actions to make this borough fairer and greener. This is not just because it is the right thing to do in a borough like Haringey, but because many of our local services are preventative. Further, already made in the previous 15 years can result in increased costs to our statutory services further down the line, with our residents and council less resilient in the face of increased need. We have applied to the government for a maximum of 37 million in exceptional financial support for next year. While this is required in order for us to set a balanced budget, we appreciate this is not a sustainable position. And as I've noted, this is a maximum of 37 million. We will continue to work across the council to reduce costs and to make every penny count so that we can minimise the use of EFS exceptional financial support as much as possible. In the longer term, we need fair funding reform from the government. The government is reviewing funding allocations to local government. There is a consultation at present and is due to have proposals for 26-27. We're pressing for changes that make sure that funding is driven by local need. And it is really important in a borough like Haringey where we have had an increase in population and an increase of 25% of the number of residents over the age of 65. So it really needs to take into account both the local resilience within the borough, the ability to raise money, but also the levels of deprivation and need that we have. We're grateful for the funding allocated to us by the new local government from the recovery grant, which was based on levels of deprivation and Haringey's relatively low council tax base. While insufficient to close our gap, this indicates a willingness to reverse the short-sighted and harmful decisions that saw Haringey lose so much funding post-2010. There are very real challenges at the moment, but there are also there's a real opportunity to reset the foundations locally and nationally. This year and in future years, our council budget will start with our local priorities, focus on the needs of local people, and build towards our shared ambition of a fairer and greener borough. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Carlin. Councillor Connor, can I ask you to please introduce the scrutiny recommendations which are in Appendix 6 of the Cabinet report? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Leader. Overview and scrutiny budget recommendations. So as Councillor Collins said, this has been noted, it's an extraordinary budget. For the first time in this council's history, we're considering a budget that's not due to be settled before full council in March. Overview and scrutiny noted that the council is not in a position to set a robust balanced budget for 2025-26 without an assumed 37 million in exceptional financial support from the government. So some general comments for overview and scrutiny. The Overview and Scrutiny Committee has repeatedly made recommendations for quarterly financial performance and risk reports for all panels, including Overview and Scrutiny, in the revenue and the capital budget. The KPMG audit report, the recent one we had on the 27th of January, on monitoring of the budget said, we're not satisfied that throughout 23-24, the budget monitoring process and associated committee scrutiny was sufficient to identify and analyse pressure and could prevent risk to the achievement of the Council's financial plan. The committee expressed concern that there was very limited information available in the budget scrutiny papers on what specific saving proposals actually involved in this year's budget, and this led to the need for additional discussion at the meeting in order to understand them properly. This lack of detailed information made it very difficult to make recommendations as there was a need to request further information, and the panel recommended there should be more detailed explanations in the budget scrutiny papers in future years, so recommendations could be made based on data and evidence presented. I'm just going to highlight a couple of recommendations from the various scrutiny panels. So Adults and Health Scrutiny Panel noted there was a highlight the risk of an extra £15.1 million of pressure in the Adult Social Services budget. And recommendation 8, we noted the offer of a collaborative approach with the co-design group for Osborne Grove in relation to the new business case, which was welcomed. I'm only going to put a few recommendations here from each of the panels due to limited time, so just please note the other recommendations in the report. Children's and Young People's Panel's recommendation 10, requests for income generation examples and the details behind these projects. Overview and Scrutiny noted during its discussions there's no long-term monitoring of projects to indicate whether they did actually generate income, and requested that, especially in capital projects, any that is designated to income generate or self-financing be reported back to OSC or respective panels to see if this really did happen as part of the budget monitoring process. In the Housing, Placemaking and Development Scrutiny Panel recommendations, recommendation 16, housing-related support contracts, we were told an update has been prepared for the panel. This information was not present at the time the panel was scrutinising the saving, so it must be said it was difficult to know whether this saving could be made. Recommendation 17 on capital investments of 13.2 million in council buildings. Recommendations around use of these buildings for interim use to maximise income generation was noted that it was continued to work to make progress on the improvement journey. These couple of sentences provided is not enough to scrutinise this level of finance or make any further recommendation. In the culture, strategy and engagement under overview and scrutiny, our recommendations around digital services at recommendation 18, we were grateful for the information provided. However, during the committee, much clearer information was needed. It took a while to try and understand what the proposals were actually trying to illustrate regarding the savings. Recommendations from overview and scrutiny on the 30th of January, which is the second scrutiny meeting. Recommendation 22 regarding the increased number of repair cases and voids. Appreciated a specific report on these concerns will now go to Housing and Planning and Development Scrutiny Panel, but we really needed the more detailed information at the time of budget scrutiny in order to make appropriate recommendations. Exceptional financial support, recommendation 25, in light of the continued increase in the budget gap in recent months and that the ongoing use of exceptional financial support beyond 25-26 is unsustainable. There needs to be robust and careful monitoring of the use of ESF funds through the in-year monitoring. The budget has thrown in stark relief the problems with just scrutinising the saving proposals. The OSC main committee has recognised that just concentrating on this aspect, although vitally important, particularly to our residents, especially if services are to be cut, doesn't tell the whole story around the financial stability of the budget as a whole. Scrutiny of the budget should, through the quarterly and year monitoring, allow robust scrutiny of the wider aspects of the panel's areas, including challenging contact monitoring and self-financing projects within capital strategy programmes. Setting the budget in its full context allowed the proper scrutiny in year, as well as the more in-depth saving budget scrutiny that we know in November, December time. Overview and Scrutiny Committee looks forward to working with our Section 151 officer and other finance officers to ensure our proposals are embedded for future budget scrutiny. And I'd just like to thank all the scrutiny officers that were part of the whole proposals as we went forward. They put in a huge amount of work into getting the papers ready for us and chasing up information. So just to note that from the committee, thank you very much. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Connor. And the response to the recommendations is on page 225. Councillor Collin, did you want to come, if you want to come back on some of those?
I'll come back on a couple of things. First of all, as already noted, Appendix 6 has the relevant responses to the scrutiny recommendations, and we thank the scrutiny panel for their recommendations. There are a couple of things that I would just like to note. We must recognise that the position that we're in financially is not in any way unique. In actual fact, a number of councils in London and out of London have applied for exceptional financial support for the financial year of 25-26, and so this is not a unique position. Primarily, our as I had said in my introduction, our overspend is because and the pressures that we're facing next year are very much to do with the increased demand in our statutory services, in adult social care and in temporary accommodation. We must note that we have been putting a considerable amount of money into adult social care every single budget for the last few years. 20 million 2 years ago, 20 million for this financial year, and 20 million and 30 million for next financial year. This is a huge increase in our budget for adult social care of almost 50% on the original budget that we had a couple of years ago. And this is driven by a combination of increased demand and also increased costs of providing the care that our residents need, and the demographic problems that we have in Haringey. So the other large increase, of course, is temporary accommodation, not necessarily the numbers. Our housing needs team is exemplary and in actually preventing homelessness, in ensuring that homeless households that are about to become homeless are actually moved seamlessly from one property into another, or otherwise we work with the landlords to keep them in the property that we're in, and that hugely reduces the numbers that actually come through that we owe a duty to and that we have to then house. But we do have a duty, as with adult social care, to house. So these increased costs are primarily what has led to us being in the budget position that we're in, and the fact that we have lost, as we've said, £143 million. Now, it is going to take time for us to resolve this, but obviously, and for funding to come in. But we as council officers and politicians are doing absolutely everything to look at every section of the council to ensure that every pound is wisely spent and every penny counts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlin. Can I ask if Cabinet members have any questions on the budget report to Councillor Carlin? So, Councillor Dasneves.
Thank you, Leader. Just wondering how much extra investment we've had in Haringey from the new government and how that's been influenced by the need that we see in a borough like ours.
Thank you, Councillor Dasneves. As a council in this year's settlement, we received in total about 16 million extra in new funding. Part of this additional money was the government had a recovery grant, which is based on deprivation and ability to raise income. And we were granted over £5 million from that grant. Now, that is an important indicator for us because of the government's fair funding review that's going to take place that will look at those indicators. We also saw one of the highest allocations of funding for our homelessness prevented grant, which actually we know we use very well in Haringey. We did get additional funding, and it's a good sign of the direction of travel. But there's obviously a lot further we need to go, and unfortunately, it wasn't enough for us to close our budget gap for next year. Thank you.
More questions, Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Collins, I just wanted to ask about the council's total revenue funding for this year, and also could you reiterate how much was cut from Haringey's revenue funding in the austerity years?
Our revenue funding for this year, our revenue funding is just under 320 million. And as I said previously in my introduction, that we have about 143 million less in real terms than we had in 2011. And that's really important because you can see what a high percentage we have actually lost. Of course, it's not just our revenue funding. We also have still have a fairly substantial capital programme. And within our housing revenue account, we are spending a considerable amount of money to build new council homes, which will make our housing revenue account more sustainable in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Brabazon.
So from your experience of the budget making and the process and what's going on, what do you think are the most important and immediate changes needed to resolve the crisis in local government funding?
Well, the most important need is that the government looks at actual need in individual boroughs and that we get proper fair funding. And that might mean that the pot also needs to be bigger, because it's not just boroughs like Haringey, but all boroughs need to have fairer funding and make sure that they have sufficient funding to provide for the statutory services that we have no option but to provide for. And so I think that that's one of the first important things that we need to do. And as I've mentioned, I think there's a move in the correct direction because of the way that the recovery grant was actually distributed. We also need, for Haringey and for other outer London boroughs, it's really important that the outdated definition from 1965 of inner and outer London needs to be completely just removed. Haringey is in the position, as I've said, of not only are we considered an outer London borough, but we actually consider an inner London borough for statistical purposes. Makes absolutely no sense. But with fairer funding and making sure all boroughs get what they need, hopefully that will go. We also, funding has to take consideration of temporary accommodation costs, because that affects London particularly badly, where 1 in 50 Londoners, we understand, is actually homeless in London, and it's a huge burden on all the London boroughs. So we also need to take account of our council tax base, and there is a consideration of where the council tax should change. Business rates needs to be looked at. Really, everything needs to be looked at. But for us, and a borough like Haringey, we really need to take into consideration our levels of deprivation, because if we don't provide those services that our residents rely on, they never get out of a cycle of low paid work and poverty. And the support that we can give them and the preventative services that local councils provide can transform both their economic futures, but also the economic future of our borough. Thank you.
Councillor Arkel.
You've already touched on this, Councillor Carlin, but the cost of temporary accommodation is up 68% this year in London alone, and spending on homelessness across London is up 350% since 2013. And along with the really sharp rise in both adult and children's social care costs, it's creating enormous budget challenges for local councils across the country. Can you explain what proportion of Haringey's budget is spent on both social care and temporary accommodation alone, please?
Of our budget, over 61% is spent on our social care adults and children's, and on temporary accommodation. This is a huge proportion of our budget, and it does mean that all the other services that residents rely on basically comes down to under 40% of our budget. And that's the reason that we desperately need fairer funding. Thank you.
Any more questions from the Cabinet? No. Is there any questions on the scrutiny recommendations? We have a whole series of responses on 225, but is there anything anyone else wants to clarify? No. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Connor. Councillor Corley Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Collin, thank you. So given both the current in-year budget gap and the estimated budget gap of 124 million across the MTFS, is the working assumption now that further financial support will be required from the government for the in-year budget balancing and for balancing the MTFS over the period between now and 2030? And on the borrowing, the 27 million of the 37 million, can you confirm the interest rate and the loan repayment terms for that? How long we'll be repaying that 1.35 million per annum back? And I think it's at 5%. So maybe just clarity on that. And in the last week, the Chief Executive has announced the convening of 3 new emergency financial recovery groups. Why, as the lead cabinet member and a part of this council's leadership, were you not forming these sorts of groups a year ago, given you have access to the weekly monitoring, the monthly monitoring, the quarterly monitoring? This is not new information. This has been coming for a long time. So were you caught unaware? Why were you not setting up these groups then? Thank you.
Thank you, Council. First of all, in terms of the in-year position at the moment, we have made an application for in-year for some financial support should we require it. As I've said in a previous answer, the work that we're doing across the council to look at every single budget and to reduce costs wherever we can is not just about next year's financial budget. It is actually about the work that we're doing in year. At current, I can't tell you the figure that we're going to need if we do need EFS for the current year, because it is dependent on the work that we do and what we can use to close that budget gap. So we may need some. We have made the application. In terms of us borrowing the money, as I said previously in a previous answer, response, one must recognize what's really important, that these are maximum figures. These are not the figures that it's not like, oh, well, we can borrow or we can use that amount of money, and so we're definitely going to use it, and it's just there and we don't have to do anything. That's just additional money in our budget. That's not the way that we see it, either politically or our officers. The important thing is that is the maximum that we can use, and the work has to be done to reduce the amount that we use as a drawdown. Our 151 officers described it a bit like having an overdraft. So it's not that we want to use that amount, but we had to produce a balanced budget, which has to come to this cabinet and has to go to March, and there's work ongoing to reduce the amounts. In terms of how much borrowing, well, it's a capitalisation directive is not just borrowing, it's also the ability to use capital receipts. So it will be a combination of the two, and it will be at the normal rates for Public Works Board. So it's at the moment about 5%. It may go down. The previous government did add an additional punitive 1% on top of that, but this government has not done so. And in terms of why are we in this position, has this not been coming down the line? Well, no, actually, in actual fact, we thought we had put enough money, for example, into adults. We put an additional £20 million into the 24-25 budget for adults, and £20 million the year before. We absolutely were not expecting the level of need and the increased numbers and complexity of need. Likewise with temporary accommodation, this was not predicted and has caught all local authorities in the same kind of way. So the work that we have been doing across the council has been ongoing. But the position that we are in is an exceptional position, and it's not a position, as I've said previously, that is just to do with Haringey. It's a position that three of our North London, interestingly, outer London boroughs and two of our neighbours have also applied for exceptional financial support for 25-26, and it's not because any of us were being relaxed about funding and about the pressures. This year has just seen an exponential rise in pressure to all local authorities, almost across the country. In fact, I think of London, the only one that I know of that doesn't have an overspend this year. I think there's one council that at the moment doesn't have an overspend. Every single council has. So the reason that we have put in place, and the chief exec and the leader and we have put in place the exceptional support, is because we're in exceptional circumstances, and so it is a resource, and it will be intensive, but we recognise the seriousness of the problem, both politically and officers, and that's why we have put these measures in place. Thank you. Torrin, is there anything further that you would like to add?
I just wanted to add on the borrowing element of the exceptional financial support. So as Councillor Carlin said, in the budget, we've assumed that will be borrowed at 5%. So it is the PWLB rate. But just to say, we will borrow at the rate at the time. So that's not fixed at 5%. So we'll watch interest rates during the year. And just your other part of the question was over how long. So the assumption is borrowing is over 20 years, which is the standard assumption for exceptional financial support. Thanks.
Thank you. So if we can move to the resolution, which is set out in 3.1 of the report, pages 31 to 32 of the agenda. Are we all in agreement? Agreed. Thank you. Item 10, which is the housing revenue account, 2025-26 budget and MTFS 25-26 to 29-30. Councillor Williams, can you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Leader. So Haringey is committed to fairer housing, and that means making sure our residents have safe, stable, warm and comfortable homes. We're investing our housing budget, the HRA, that is the housing revenue account, into repairing and renovating our existing council homes and into building new homes for people on the waiting list. We want both existing council tenants and new tenants to live in high quality homes, and for more families and individuals in the borough who need the security of social housing to be able to set down roots and thrive. Some of the key investments we make in existing council homes include improving kitchens and bathrooms, keeping estates safer, keeping homes warm and dry, making homes cheaper to heat. Our investment in new council homes, at least 3,000 by 2031, and in renovation work to our existing council homes helps reduce the need for future expenditure on repairs. As well as capital investment, the HRA delivers important services to our tenants and leaseholders, including tenancy services, income services, including financial inclusion service, estates and neighbourhood services, so that residents that need support are able to live well in their homes and communities. So setting a sustainable HRA has become significantly more challenging in recent years because we have higher interest rates and inflation are driving up costs across the board. Construction costs have been rising for some years, increasing the costs of repairs and important building safety works. At times, council rent rises have been kept below inflation, either by national government or by local councils, with a series of 1% rent cuts between 2016 and 20 and sub-inflation rise in 23-24. However, we are able to continue to provide services to our tenants and leaseholders to invest in their homes and to build thousands of new council homes over time. A major programme that is delivering genuinely affordable homes that local people need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Is there any questions from the Cabinet for Councillor Williams? No. Okay, Councillor Cooley-Harrison.
Thanks. It's Councillor Williams. Has the new builds programme been through a similar sort of process to the capital budget, with the programme being kind of, I know it's been constantly reevaluated, but that kind of deep dive reevaluation and potential streamlining to obviously reduce the financing costs, as I think that the borrowing for this year is just under 50% of the financing, and then it kind of goes up to 2/3. I know you don't have any grants in for the futures, but it's about 2/3 for futures. And then the second question is just on voids. So in terms of absolute numbers, there's not, well, there's been a backward step because we've gone kind of from about a working figure of about 400 at the end of 23 to about 500 at the end of 2024. I know for various reasons, but do you have a new plan for voids coming into the new year, given just what a strain it's having on finances, and obviously it's remarked on in the report? And then finally, what consideration was given to going further in reprofiling the HRA budget in favour of acquiring temporary accommodation to reduce the strain on the general fund, obviously balancing out the the HRA finances as well, and that's not an endless pot or anything like that. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll answer to the best of my ability, then I'll bring in Robbie as he's sitting here. So all of the new builds are continually going through a process around value engineering to make sure they are delivering value for money and that the contracts we're sourcing are the cheapest, best value for money at the time. And there's been actually some quite good work done in that area. On the voids, as you know from Housing Improvement Board, a lot of stats come in there. It's obviously an area that we've put a lot of focus on, including the long-term voids. So that work on the long-term voids is more or less complete, and those works will be progressing. That's the voids that have really major structural works that need doing. And also, I'm pleased to report that we've the voids teams for 4 weeks in a row now have been exceeding their targets. So I think obviously it's something that we're very keen on speeding up. And obviously, it's been generations since there has been the sort of new council house builds for local residents to move into, obviously leaving an empty property behind them. So the teams have really had more work. So as you've seen, there's been a couple of contracts go out to help with that work. Well, there's too many. The TA HRA question is sort of a complex one, because actually I'll let Robbie answer, but it's more the general fund support. Anyway, I'll let Robbie answer that one.
Yes, so on the cost of new builds, through the process of this business plan, we have reduced the cost by about 14% of the housing delivery programme, while still delivering the same number of homes. So that value engineering process, you know, we've been going through design work, we've been going through procurement, we've been looking at how can we deliver the same quality housing, the same number of homes, but cheaper. And so that's been a real focus of the team this year, and that's one of the key things that has helped the sustainability of the plan. In terms of TA acquisitions or homelessness discharge acquisitions, as they really are, we have upped the budget quite significantly in the HRA. So there's £101 million in this year to support a target of delivering 250 acquisitions next year. There's also some general fund capital that's washing through into that as well. And we have applied to the GLA for some funding through the council homes acquisition programme that we're expecting a formal response on soon, but we believe we should be able to secure that. So there is funding in place to significantly step up the the acquisition of homes for to discharge our homelessness duty.
Chair, if I just may, is the cap on that based on the finances?
Hold on.
Sorry.
Did you want to come back? I mean,
Yes, I did, please. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
Is the cap largely based on the financial position, or you don't think you'd actually be able to acquire any more homes because of the market?
I think this year we'll do over 100, which is more than we did last year. Yeah. We're looking to more than double next year. Yeah. I don't think there's necessarily a cap. I think we are looking to increase it. Yeah, it's upwards progress. Yeah. We are looking to deliver as much as we can through whichever routes we can, and it's sort of a key plank of the general fund MTFS that you've seen before. There's a lot of work to do. You'll notice that we've sort of given a clear steer of what we think we can do next year. Yeah. In future years we'll plan again, and we'll see where we get to.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, if we can move to the resolution, which is set out in 3.1 of the report, page 308 of the agenda. Do we all agree? Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, item 11, which is the determination of the council school admission arrangements for the academic year 26-27. Councillor Brabazon, can you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. This is the regular report which we're required to bring to Cabinet every year regarding school admissions, and this is for admissions arrangements, as you said, for this academic year 26-27. We've had a very full consideration of all the available evidence related to the ebb and flow of school places, and this paper is recommending that Cabinet agree to determine the Council's admissions arrangements for academic year 26-27, which includes proposal to reduce the planned admission numbers for some primary and secondary schools listed in table 1, para 6.9 of this report. This is a very straightforward report, which is to a formula really that we have to bring for statutory reasons, and regrettably we are having to propose some further reductions in planned admission limits, not just for primary but also this is now seeping through to secondary. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brabazon. Any questions from the Cabinet? Councillor Hackata.
It is a very straightforward report, but there are sort of two areas that are red flags, I guess, just generally. One is the structural thing. So all those schools are forecast to have further declining numbers, according to the report, which is worrying. I mean, obviously in my ward in Hermitage and Gardens, we're facing a serious crisis with school numbers, pupil numbers at the school. If that's the case at these three, is it a structural problem that we're, that essentially we're bailing out water, and we need to, there's something greater needs to be done? And finally, just obviously this will mean that there will potentially be redundancies. So, and how that process is managed and how the council supports schools through that process. No.
Give you a general answer, and I'm going to ask Jane to come in on the detail. It's structural in as much as if the birth rate has fallen, then we can't have school places for children that aren't there. And there has been a catastrophic fall in the birth rate across London. I think I've said in the Cabinet before, in the London Council's report, only 3 London councils have shown a growth in school population. All the others are facing the same issues we are. There's been a lot of work done in the service to plan and look at the pupil yield and all that stuff. And I think we've worked very hard to try and come to a position where we've stabilised. So we're hoping that the position that we're in now, where we reduced the planned admission numbers across several schools, and the reports that we're going to hear later will stabilise the position for now. But I'll ask Jane to come in and also to respond on the issues of the impact on school budgets.
Thank you, Councillor Brabazon. So first of all, the reductions in published admission numbers for our primary schools this year and in previous years have put us in a much better position in terms of the number of surplus places. So we know that some councils are struggling with surplus places in reception that are in the 20%. With this reduction with Rokesley Infant and the previous published admission number reductions, we're now somewhere between 5 and 10%, which is what the DfE normally recommends. So I think we've already made some significant strategic decisions in order to make sure that we have schools that can plan for the number of pupils they have, and therefore can plan to reduce their staff. So on the second question, that's part of what we absolutely have to do, and that is we work with our governing bodies to look at reducing staff where we need to, if they've reduced the overall number of pupils they have. But what we tend to find is that where we're reducing the published admission numbers, we have larger groups still in the upper year groups, and so schools mostly are able to, when a person resigns, not to recruit to that post. When there is a bigger need, then the council supports the restructures through the school's finance team and the school's HR team.
Thank you, Jane. Is there any more questions from the Cabinet? No. Okay, Councillor Corley-Harrison.
Thanks, Councillor Brabazon. So 2 of the schools proposed, they're in a single ward, Hornsey, right? Well, they border my ward of Crouch End. Has the council identified any sort of specific characteristics in that area that are having a hyper-localised impact that have resulted in those 2 being the 2 this year to have their PAN numbers reduced? I mean, from my own experience, the cost of rent and housing is astronomical, and there only ever seems to be 1 or 2 bed flats going in, not the family homes. So does that come through to you at all, that information? And how do you work with other areas of the council, planning team, house building team, to ensure that we are, as much as possible, trying to share out where our families are being placed around the borough?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I think we've been arguing for a long time about discussing for a long time the impact of the housing market, Brexit, cost of living, people moving out of London who can work from home, remotely, whatever, sell their house in, Crouch End for an enormous amount of money and get a very big house somewhere else. All those factors have contributed to the position we're in. It's very complicated. For example, you know, Coleridge is a border school, takes children from Islington, so it has an intake which comes from another borough very significantly. For example, Ropes is not in that position, it's geographically located differently. So I think it's a really complex question, but I think the impact of the housing market is absolutely impacting on people's decisions about when they'll have children, how many children they'll have, and so on. And other sociological changes, having children later, women working, all those sorts of things which are impacting. So it is a bit of a perfect storm, really. In relation to your question about working with other departments, the whole drive of the council's house building programme has been around family housing. Very significantly, I think we should be really proud of the number of 3 beds, 4 beds that we're building, you know, for rent, for council rent. There's a huge change, but of course you have to build where you can, and land values and where land is available and all the other things that come into play. Whether Rob wants to comment on that, I don't know, or Jane, but that's fundamentally my answer. Yeah.
Yeah, just to say that what we've seen today is a reduction. We've needed to take a reduction in places much more in the east. We're now seeing it in the west. And as Councillor Brabazon has outlined, that's due to mobility. It's also as some of our schools have more spaces, pupils can move more easily. So if people think they want to move schools, they can. But it is about the costs of housing, and it is about the smaller number of children, which we're now seeing right the way across the piece. And then in terms of information from colleagues, very much so, we use the information regarding developments to put into our forecasting with something that sounds very unattractive, but we call it yield, pupil yield. So we have a formula that looks at the number of units that are coming online and how many children we might have out of that. And we've done a check on that recently. And so we make sure we get that information from our colleagues as well and put that into the forecasting.
Thank you. And I'll come in as well. Rob Szosowski, Assistant Director for Planning, Building Standards and Sustainability. So yeah, Councillor Brabazon and Jane are absolutely right. We work closely as a planning service with the education service in things like the school yield, the school place planning. We actually provide the kind of housing information on where new housing is coming forward across the borough in different wards to the education service to help with that school place planning. And obviously any new housing is good for child yield, but the more family housing we get is even better for child yield. So as you know, we've got family housing policies as part of the local plan, and in the emerging new local plan we'll be bringing out later this year, we're looking to strengthen as much as we can the family housing policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if we can move to the resolution, which is set out in 3.1 to 3.6 of the report, and this is on page 332. Do we all agree? Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, item 12, carbon offset fund allocation strategy 2025 to 2029. Councillor Williams. My paper. Sorry, Councillor Hakata, apologies. You're easy to mix up.
We're fortunate enough in Haringey to have brilliant teams in our planning and carbon management services, working tirelessly and successfully to minimise carbon emissions in new developments. No better illustration of their excellent work than our council's recent triumph at the prestigious Planning Awards, where our planning team was crowned Local Authority Team of the Year, with members of our carbon management team joining them to collect the award. Despite their best efforts to drive down drive down on-site emissions to zero, which is the stipulation in the London Plan, it's not always possible. And in these instances, the London Plan allows developers to offset residual emissions through cash in lieu contributions, which are called carbon offsets. These feed into the Haringey's Carbon Offset Fund, providing an invaluable source of funding to deliver strategic carbon reduction projects in the borough. They have to reduce by law carbon in what they're spent on. So our teams have worked with service area officers in other service areas across the council to look at where they can achieve the greatest reductions, as well as reduce pressure on our core budget and deliver co-benefits such as social value benefits and community cohesion. The 7 projects that are listed here span initiatives to decarbonise our corporate estate, support community action, tackle fuel poverty, increase urban tree planting and drive behaviour change. And it needs to be noted that these allocations are sort of general allocations. We'll then work with the teams and with the portfolio holders to look at the details of each of those allocations to make sure that they work for those service areas and for the wider benefit of the borough. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hurkata. Any questions from the Cabinet? Councillor Over.
Thank you, Leader. Just a couple of questions in regards to the Haringey Community Carbon Fund. So will there be a set of criteria that various different organisations, for instance, will need to meet in order to be able to ensure that this grant funding is distributed fairly? And also in terms of the behaviour change initiative, it's quite a substantial amount of funding. So will there be measures in place to ensure that outcomes are met in order to make sure there is actual behaviour change? So how will that be monitored?
Yeah, very good questions, and I'll just answer in the broad sense, and then bring in the officers. There's Rob's here, and also I believe Suzanne might be here from the carbon team. So in terms of the last round of the Community Carbon Fund has just completed. So a panel is now assessing which of the submissions will go through. There's a number of criteria they can go into that with you, but I think one crucial aspect of this is what we've seen is a broad range of applications from across the borough, east and west, and I think that's a really important one. And historically, throughout the history of the fund, projects have been funded in Tottenham as much as in the west of the borough, and I think that's a really great signal to the wider region, frankly. Sorry, the last question was on just the...
Yeah, I mean, the behaviour change
Oh,
initiative.
yeah. So, okay. So, I mean, I would probably challenge the assertion that that is a substantial amount. I think, you know, in terms of where money, how far money can go, it's amazing how not far it can go. I can't think of a better way of putting it. But however, what we want to do is ensure that we can leverage this amount to get the best and the widest and deepest results. We are at the moment finalising the decision on what behaviour change programme we are going to be working with, but it's almost certainly one that works with schools. We're working with Councillor Brabazon in sort of developing that. We've got an eco schools programme that I think is really groundbreaking, that I think would achieve those results. But I'll pass over to Rob.
I'm going to turn my phone off so it doesn't make that noise. Thank you. So just on the question about the criteria, the existing criteria we've got at the moment for the scheme is about effectiveness of delivering carbon reductions. So does it actually reduce carbon? The delivery plan, is it deliverable? What are the timescales? Value for money, obviously very important. Community engagement, key. Are they going to engage the community as part of doing that project? And also, do they need any other permissions or consents that might be a barrier to delivery? So those are the current criteria. There will be a report coming back to Cabinet to go into more detail on the Haringey Community Carbon Fund element of this in the next few months, and that will reflect on how good those criteria have been over the last few years. any amendments, and there's also been community engagement on that. So there's been a lot of feedback received by the team on how it's worked, so we can improve those criteria going forward. And I've got nothing to add to what Councillor Carter said on the behaviour change initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions from the Cabinet? No. Okay, Councillor Cawley Harrison.
Thanks, Councillor Carter. So just some clarity really. So 6.8, section 6.8 references money previously agreed to be spent on fuel poverty measures. And it says 470,000 was spent on procuring a new and independent installer of measures. What's that? What's an independent installer of measures? And then also some of the schemes are kind of vague. So it says to retrofit one community facing council building. There's behaviour change initiatives. And these are all going to have a plan developed this year. So given kind of the early stages, how accurate can we be about the actual delivery? Because the fund's limited, obviously, it's what's been collected. So how accurate can we be about what can actually be delivered? And then 6.10 outlines some of the process for how the schemes could be added to the list for funding. So just wondering how the 7 schemes that are there were selected. Was there like a long list? Was there a scoring profile that's not in the report? How did it get arrived at? Thanks.
Okay, so the measures, so in order to tackle fuel poverty, but remember that the stipulation is that it's reducing carbon. So they will be measures to do with insulating homes, for instance, in homes suffering from fuel poverty. In terms of, sorry, question 2, trying to just need a note.
Yeah, it was just so the kind of the plans as they are will need some fleshing out. So, you know, how can we get to that point?
Yeah, so as I said in my introduction, these were, so there was a general allocation based on the effectiveness of reducing carbon, but also some of the other co-benefits. So going forward, and I think this kind of probably feeds into your third question, is in terms of actually reducing carbon and actually having effective programs, we'll work very closely with the portfolio holders and the service area leads to ensure that they are effective. So at that point, we will then obviously report back in terms of, the effectiveness of the scheme.
And then, sorry, the third one, whether there was a long list or scoring system, like how did 7 get?
I will pass that over to Rob.
Yep, thank you very much. No long list or short list as such, but it was very much looking at aligned with existing things that are going on across the council, particularly given the budget challenges, aligning with things to support the capital programme, to reduce the council's borrowing, things like that. So aligning with some of the property capital programmes in terms of retrofit and saving energy. So a lot of work was done to align it with things that are going on across the council, but actually making sure that still delivers an additionality in terms of carbon offset. So aligning the two to get those co-benefits was one of the key approaches in setting the 7. Thanks.
So if we can move to the resolution, which is set out in 3.11 to 3.13 of the report, page 418 and 419. Are we all in agreement? Thank you. Item 13, contract award for the NCL Integrated Sexual Health Service to Central North West London NHS Foundation Trust. Councillor Das-Neves.
Thank you, Chair. So set out in this report is the proposal for the contract for the Sexual Health Partnership for across North Central London. In Haringey, we've benefited from a really varied offer of services to support people's sexual health and the choices that they'd like to make around it. That includes some very local services, including operated out of our pharmacies, online offer, which is very important, and we've seen quite a lot of success and growth in, but also, of course, specialist services, some of which are located within the borough, as is appropriate for groups and what they would prefer, but also we know that many people don't want to access services on their doorstep for a range of reasons, but we also know that some services are best provided in a very specialised environment, medical environment. So I think this contract further supports the kinds of services that both we in Haringey and across North Central London would like to see serving residents, and so I recommend it to you all.
Thank you, Councillor Dasnevs. Is there any questions for Councillor Dasnevs on this report from the Cabinet? Okay, Councillor Cooley-Harrison.
Thanks, Councillor Dasnevs. Can I just ask firstly, when it comes to extending the contract again, if that were to happen after the 3-year period that this runs for, what's the process for any disagreements between the boroughs, if there were to be any, or want to leave or whatever it would be? And then I'm wondering whether the council has any kind of metrics on the kind of the pound spent or the pound invested, so to speak, versus pounds saved with preventative or proactive sexual and reproductive health investment, particularly the impact on public health. And if you don't, whether that is available somewhere. And then 6.21 refers to the prevalence of HIV being higher across Haringey than the national average. So I'm just wondering what kind of explicit work Haringey is undertaken to increase the use of PrEP within the borough. Thanks.
Thanks, Luke. It's quite a lot of technical things there that I might hand over to officers, but just generally to emphasise, which I meant to actually in my introduction, and just remind, of course, these services, you're quite right, we should be measuring their outputs, and we've seen good outputs, and I'm sure officers can come in on that and seen good impact. Of course, they are also mandated, so we are required to have them, and of course, it comes out of that public health budget as a requirement. So just emphasising that. But I wonder if on those quite technical questions, we've got Will online. Do you want to come in, and then we might follow up with a bit of a written answer as well on some of the greater detail. I think we've got Will online.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, Will here, Will Maris, Director of Public Health. So first question was on value for money and return on investment. I don't have figures to hand, but what I would say is obviously there's a balanced approach, strategic approach. So the services that we provide are one angle where people can access support and treatment if they're already impacted by a sexually transmitted infection. But of course, there are prevention programs. So we have programs that give free access to condoms. There's a London HIV prevention program. And we have education in schools, and all of those will have an impact. I don't have figures to hand, and there may be some modelling that we can provide separately. In terms of prevalence of HIV, we've done a lot of work in Haringey to increase access to HIV testing through GPs. And then you mentioned specifically about PrEP. So across this footprint with this provider, CNWL, we've been working really hard to increase access to PrEP, primarily among gay and bisexual men who have sex with men. But we're also looking now to expand that to other communities, particularly other risk groups. We see high rates of HIV in Black African and Black Caribbean communities, heterosexual men and women. So we're doing some outreach work with those communities to encourage them to take up PrEP. There is more work to do in this front. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. So we will return to the resolutions after considering exempt information at item 21. We can go to item 14, which is facilities management and premises responsible persons policy. Councillor Gordon. Oh, yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, thank you. I'll start again. I was just making sure you were all awake, and you obviously noticed the mic wasn't on, so you are. So this is seeking approval for facilities management and premises responsible persons policies. Sounds very local government-ish, but I'm trying to reassure you that this is an important milestone in our strategy that we've been developing over a couple of years now to ensure that the full and transparent and robust procedures are all in place for our SAMPIP, which is a Strategic Asset Management and Property Improvement Plan. So this is arising out of that plan and the objectives that we set out and that were agreed by this Cabinet, and especially Objective 5, which was to establish a corporate property model and that holds all the non-residential property and budgets centrally in accordance with good practice. That was the objective. Out of that, we have devised the corporate property model. So budgets and facilities management will be held centrally for the benefit of the services. And for each and every building, there will be a property premises responsible person, so that an individual is responsible for each property. So that's what's listed in the document and outlined in the actual policy documents that appended at inside the pack. So obviously it's about setting high standards and about making sure that we've got the most efficient use of resources and that the standards are maintained throughout the portfolio and are of the highest possible standards. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Questions from the Cabinet? No. Okay. Councillor Colley-Harrison.
Thanks, Councillor Gordon. So the strategy mentions there'll be measurements against KPIs. Just wondering where they'll be set out, where they'll be published. And then there's a table in Appendix 1 of the property list, effectively. Does the council now have a kind of a condition survey report of all of those in a single table? And is there kind of an at-risk register of buildings that do need investment? And if so, and hopefully there is there an investment plan for those buildings? And I say that with a bit of a vested interest because Crouch End Clock Tower is literally falling down, and there's vegetation that's growing through the centre of the clock tower, and no one goes in there apart from the festival every year for Santa's Grotto and all that sort of thing. So no one notices. But it's obviously one of the borough's most iconic buildings, I'm sure you'd agree. So whether that sort of property would see some level of work to make sure it doesn't fall down on top of the Broadway at some point, hopefully not.
Well, hope it's not going to fall down anytime soon, but yeah, if there are particular problems, I'm sure that the Crouch End councillors will be bringing those to our attention, so we can take that up as a piece of casework. And I'll ask officers to come in about these frequency. We've agreed every year to come back to the Cabinet, so it's in the public domain, about the progress on each of the objectives, and we'll be bringing a paper quite soon about what we will do with some of the objectives under SAMPIP that have actually been achieved, so there's no point in keeping them. So there's I don't want to sort of give a preamble for what's coming in the future, but we are at the moment preparing to come back to Cabinet with our annual report, and obviously there's other committees of the council that take reports on this, so all of that is being standardised and so on. I'll ask officers to come back. We've got both Jonathan Kirby in the room and Andrew Meek, who can fight over who wants to come back about the reference to the table 1, I think you said, and the at-risk register. And I just want to say a few words about investment. So every building is being assessed. Now, I think people maybe want to expect that we can do things immediately. It's a vast property portfolio worth a heck of a lot of money, and we need to protect that interest. Every single building will and is being assessed for all through a process that we can be clear about how we've made that assessment, what purpose it is for the services, whether that's children's services or the park service or whatever it is, whether it can be repurposed if it is surplus to requirements. So we are going through that process, which is an ongoing process. Is the building surplus to requirements? If it is, then what is the best? Is it that we can invest in that building and reuse it somewhere else? Is it that we just would want to dispose of it? That would be the normal way that a corporate landlord would operate, and that's the process that we're going through. So, but I'll ask officers to come in to supplement that.
Yeah, Andrew Meek, interim AD for capital projects and property. So we have very thorough knowledge of the condition of all of our buildings. They're not necessarily set out in a formal condition survey, because a condition survey is very in-depth, and it would be unduly expensive for us to have condition surveys for all of these buildings. But my team go out and visit all these buildings regularly. We get all of the compliance checks done. So we assess the need for repairs and maintenance, and that's what then goes towards us building the annual capital programme for the forward maintenance plan that we carry out. So I hope that gives you kind of confidence that we do monitor very carefully the condition of all our buildings, and I'd be very happy to speak at sort of outside this meeting about the clock tower.
Thank you. So if we can move to the resolution, which is in 3.1 of the report on page 446. Do we all agree? Agreed? Okay. Item 15, the Housing Annual Report 2023 to 24. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. So as a council landlord, we're obliged by the regulator of social housing to be accountable, accessible and transparent in the way we deliver our services. So this report supports that obligation by providing our residents and stakeholders with a view of what we have done to maintain good quality and safe homes, to support neighbourhoods and communities and manage our tenancy services well. It also provides tenant satisfaction data, complaints figures and a breakdown of budget allocation and how we have spent the income we receive. The report for 2023-24 describes our ongoing priorities and next steps as we continue the transformation process set out in our housing improvement plan. It sets out the progress we've made in respect of compliance with fire and electrical safety standards, making more of our homes decent, delivering major work schemes, tackling repairs issues, improving our tenancy management and our continued support for tenants with a cost of living crisis and migration to universal credit, and involving our residents in shaping our services through our resident engagement framework. It also reflects a positive shift in around half of our tenant satisfaction measures. We have been meeting regularly with the housing regulator and housing ombudsman as we roll out our improvement plan, and have had positive feedback from them in 2024, confirming that the service is moving in the right direction. But we do need to keep up this momentum in the coming year, as there is still much to do, particularly around improving our repair service, resolving damp and mould issues and learning from complaints where our performance unfortunately remains below average. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Is there any questions for Councillor Williams on this report? No? Okay. Councillor Cooley-Harrison.
Thank you. So the figure for the percentage of day-to-day leasehold charges collected is 123%, because it includes arrears from previous years. So it's kind of not really an accurate figure. So do you know what the kind of the, let's call it in-year figure is for arrears collection? Sorry, for leasehold charge collection. And whether the 95% target was achieved. And then just your last point was on the kind of complaint situation. So obviously the report has 17% satisfaction rating amongst tenants for complaint handling. And obviously it's been a focus of the improvement board as well, complaints handling. So given that it's kind of fallen back on the year before slightly, just wondering again whether there is going to be a change of tack for complaints handling, or, you know, because if the current year way of working has not really progressed it in a positive manner, whether some new ideas are being brought forward. And then just on the kind of the service charge spend, one of the kind of the largest percentages in the chart is on supervision and management, which I'm sure that residents will probably think, well, what's that? And be quite surprised that that's the biggest component of it. So if you could just kind of break that down a little bit, and whether any work is kind of undergoing to try and bring that down to make sure that obviously those who are paying service charges are getting value for money in terms of council's management. Thanks.
Thanks. They're quite technical questions asking for more detail than is in the report. So my understanding is we're exceeding the 95% currently, but I think we'd have to confirm that in writing to you, if that's okay. On the complaints handling, I think really it just needs to be an increased capacity. We're discussing it today in a meeting. We just need more capacity in that area. And your last question, I think, yeah, Robbie would like to have a go at answering.
Yeah, on supervision and management, that's not just literally management. That includes tenancy management. It includes supported housing services. So it's quite a lot of the sort of people services that our tenants receive. So while that might be the title, it is actually a load of services that our tenants do value. And
Okay, if we can move to the resolution set out in 3.1 of the report. This is on page 486. Do we all agree? Agreed. Okay. Item 16, results of the pre-publication consultation on the future of Tiverton Primary School and the publication of the statutory notice. Councillor Brabazon.
Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Do I need to recuse myself from this debate?
I understand that you're no longer a governor.
I am no longer a governor, no.
And if you think that you sort of can't approach it with an open mind, then please do excuse yourself.
Yeah, okay. I think I'm going to do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think you will appreciate that this isn't a report that one would want to bring to Cabinet. We don't people work in children's services, and as a council, we're not in the business of trying to move towards the closure of schools. And it is with deep regret that I'm bringing this report this evening, which is the final report to Cabinet regarding the various processes of consultation that have taken place regarding the future of Tiverton Primary School. And this is a report back to Cabinet on the outcome of the 6-week pre-publication consultation on options for the future of Tiverton School. And I'm seeking agreement to move to the next stage of the process, which is the publication of a statutory proposal to close the school. I've written a very long Cabinet member introduction, and rather than go through every word, I'll just summarise it. The background is, of course, we have some very fine performing schools, some of the best in the country, and are very proud of the outcomes for our children and young people. In 2023, 73.2% of Haringey early years pupils achieved a good level of development, ranked 7th highest in the country out of 152. And in 2024, this increased to 5th in London and 17th in the country. So this is a credit to our children, our families, and all the work that has gone on. And there have been similar improvements in results in Key Stage 2, GCSE and A level. However, as we've talked about previously in this meeting, numbers have fallen regarding pupil places, and huge pressure has, this is a huge pressure on schools, which has been increased by the impact of budgets and funding that has not kept in line with neither inflation nor pay awards. And so regrettably, some of our schools, including Tiverton, have fallen into very serious deficit. The council has a statutory duty to provide high quality places for our children and ensure places are planned effectively. But the financial pressures have threatened this, and we have a system which is, as we've discussed on many occasions, on crisis. And it's why we must now begin to consider the difficult options outlined in this report for Tiverton Primary School. There are many reasons why the school's long-term viability can be questioned and sustainability can be questioned. The school has had a very large deficit, its numbers have declined, and there have been other difficulties in the management of the school. It is currently rated as required improvement, and with declining numbers and so on and losing staff, the prospects for change are not very significant. So for all those reasons, we have gone through various consultations, and now this evening is the final part of that process, and I'm asking Cabinet to agree the recommendations as set out in the report, which regrettably are to move to closure of the school.
Thank you, Councillor Brabazon. Any questions from the Cabinet? Okay, Councillor Crawley-Harrison.
Thanks, Councillor. In the report, there's reference to the entire no longer existing Board of Governors resigning in October 2024. I'm just wondering if there was a specific reason for that. And obviously the report also references the finances for Seven Sisters. I'm just wondering whether that is also at risk of a similar process now, given what's been published there. And then just on pupils, well, obviously there's reference in there to the work that's happening. But, just one aspect that I didn't pick up was whether work would take place to try and keep sort of friendship groups together where possible, or whether the allocation kind of works like applying to reception, where it's based on distances or siblings or all of that sort of thing. So whether there's a bit more of I don't know, interaction with kind of the allocations of transfers. Thanks.
I'll just give a general answer, and again, I'm going to refer to officers around some of the more detail. Governors resigned because of the situation at the school. They're faced with this massive deficit and nowhere to go, and the council saying, we're not going to lend you any more money because you're not going to pay it back. And so really the school's finances have just overwhelmed them, is my understanding. Jane may want to clarify a bit more. In terms of Seven Sisters, that's now relaunched as South Grove. Its finances are more stabilised, and it hosts a borough's nurture hub for children with very young children have social and emotional problems, have severe behaviour and so on. So South Grove is much more stabilised. Regarding where children go, parents can go wherever they like. They vote with their feet. And you can't move children. It's up to the families how they wish to do that. And I believe admissions are supporting families on an individual basis to make a choice for their children for next September. But Jane may want to reassure you that everything is being done so that families can access the school places of their choice. I'll just say one more thing on that. It becomes much more complicated about where you go, because lots of schools have places. People don't have to go as locally as they would have. They may say, oh, I'd like to go to Rokesley. So Rokesley's got places, for example.
Thank you. That's not me. It's definitely not me. Sorry. Thank you. We'll try again. It's right, it stopped. Oh, no, it hasn't. No, my phone's nowhere near, so hopefully it will work.
Needs to be.
All right, okay. I was going to put my ex-head teacher voice on and hope it worked. In terms of the first question, the governor's resigned. One of the statutory duties and statutory powers we still have in terms of schools causing concern statutory duties is that we can serve warning notices where we're concerned about leadership and governance, which we think will be prejudicial to the overall standards of education for pupils. So a warning notice was served on Tiverton Primary School, and subsequently we put in an interim executive board, which is a very small group of governors in inverted brackets who are now leading the school. And so those three are governors with extensive experience in other schools and as chairs of governors in other areas. I think Councillor Brabazon has explained that obviously the school finances, Seven Sisters, a piece of work was done just early doors about 20 months ago, looking at their deficit position and putting them into a more sustainable position. They've restructured, and that was work that the other school hadn't done, but they've done a lot of work in order to create more sustainability. I can't put a crystal ball on and say that it won't be vulnerable in the future, because what we do know is that our numbers are still falling. And then the third thing is, as Councillor Brabazon has correctly said, we have a designated admissions officer for schools where we have children who will need places. And most of there have been some friendship groups who have moved as a friendship group when parents have decided to move them to other schools, because, as Councillor Brabazon has said, there are spaces, and so they're able to move them. What we are doing is a very clear focus on supporting parents whose children have additional needs to make sure they're getting the right advice and guidance in order to move their children when they've expressed a preference to do so. Should the statutory notice go forward for closure, then we'll be working very closely with those families and the remaining children that are on roll, although the number has dropped significantly.
Thank you, Jane. Okay, if we can move to the resolution, which is set out in 2.1 of the report, page 512 to 513. Do we all agree? Agreed. Thank you. Item 17, St Peter in Chains Catholic Infant and St Gilda's Catholic Junior School. Councillor Brabazon.
Thank you, Chair. This is another very. Is it okay? Oh, Mike can come.
Can we just pause and get Councillor Hagata in?
As with Tiverton, this is another report I regret having to bring to Cabinet, but we are in the most difficult position regarding school places. And as Jane has said, this is now has hit the west of the borough as well as the east. And we're bringing this report to seek consultation on closure of St Peter's in Chains and St Gilda's Catholic schools in the west of the borough. These two schools, the infants and the juniors together, have had a total collapse in numbers, and there is no prospect of those numbers increasing, and it is simply unsustainable for this school to continue. There's been extensive work done with the Archdiocese. These are Catholic schools, and the buildings and the land are owned by the Archdiocese of Westminster. And there has been agreement that this is the only way forward. And if Cabinet agree this tonight, consultation will begin almost immediately in order that the school can have a closure by the end of the academic year, which is 31st of August 2025. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Councillor Over.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Zena. It's worrying to see primary school closures. For the sake of clarity, can you please explain why the report is recommending consultation on on closure of the primary schools?
This school, because there is really no other option. There is no other option. The school did seek permission from the DfE to join a multi-academy trust. That was declined by the DfE because the school is inviable financially, hasn't got any money. It's unsustainable. So that did delay a process, but now there is absolute clarity and agreement with the Archdiocese. There's no way to federate because there aren't enough pupils in the system.
Councillor Arkell.
Thank you. As these aren't the only schools facing this similar situation, can you explain what measures are being put in place to monitor schools across the borough that might be facing or at risk of a similar circumstance, please?
It's not about putting systems in place. I think they are in place. And I'll ask Jane to clarify all the work that's been going on around monitoring school budgets, working with school governors, getting governors to face the difficult decisions they sometimes have to face, rather than sort of putting it off and then the problem will compound about how school budgets have to be balanced, that the council is no longer just loaning willy-nilly. There are a number of issues that we are now pressing schools. As Jane said, where schools are not complying, then a warning notice can be and has been issued, which says to governors, you have to do your job, really. But I'll hand over to Jane.
Yes, so we've developed a risk matrix for primary and secondary schools, which looks at a number of factors, which includes the vacancy rate in reception, vacancy rates in terms of the whole school, the financial position, any other data we've got around falling standards or standards that we're concerned about. So I have at my disposal a number of hard data that can indicate risk, and that risk matrix has enabled us to have targeted conversations with schools where we feel that there is a real cause for concern. So in the first conversations with St Peter and St Gildas were in the previous academic year, where we discussed our concern about their numbers, their falling numbers, and the ability for them to recruit more pupils. And so this report comes at the end of a lot of conversations, which is not the outcome we obviously wanted. But I think within the paper, you'll see that our faith schools have been hit with falling rolls and less applications, significantly more than our maintained schools. And once a school starts to be below one form of entry, which is a total of 210 pupils, it becomes incredibly vulnerable. So we have all of that at our disposal, and that has informed our conversations with individual schools.
Any more questions from the Cabinet? Councillor Dasnips.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Brabazon, we've had some difficult conversations today about schools and closures, and I know no one delights in any of them really, but I wonder if you could just explain a little bit what happens when schools do close, and in terms of buildings, because I know that's something that really concerns residents and families.
How long have you got? This is really quite a complicated issue. In fact, we were discussing this today at the education strategy meeting, and there's loads of hurdles and hoops. You have hurdles you have to jump and hoops you have to go through in order to get a school redesignated and all the rest of it. This school in particular, this school though, is owned by the Archdiocese of Westminster, and the land is owned by the Archdiocese of Westminster. So that may mean it may be more straightforward, so they can decide, I assume, what to do with their land. But I'm not a technical expert in this, but Jane is very experienced in this area about all the guidance that the government DfE issues about school lands and school closures. So I'll hand over to Jane.
Yeah, not a lot more to add, but I mean, the disposal of an education site is incredibly complex, and DfE have to agree to it. And in my experience, often they don't agree to that. it also, we also need to see the opportunities. We know that we're trying to increase our SEND provision as part of our safety valve programme at the moment. And so what we'd be doing is seeking to use and utilise any buildings that became free in order to make sure that we met those targets that we have within the safety valve programme. Councillor Hawley-Harrison.
Thanks. Just wondering whether you are seeing particular strain on Catholic schools, given, I mean, census data shows that, you know, that the number of people of faith in Haringey is decreased, or particularly Catholicism has decreased, whether that is putting pressure in particular on those schools, because obviously we still have a number of other ones. And then my second question's kind of a follow-up to Councillor Das-Nevs's. I used to live backing onto the infant school, and it can get quite wild if it's not maintained, and there's a lot of mature trees in the junior school right on the boundary of other properties that have, you know, damaged properties, falling branches, all that sort of thing. How can we make sure that the Archdiocese maintains the grounds, and not just the building but everything, because it's a big site, or two over the two sites, and then really the same for Tiverton, actually, given there's more control there, just to ensure there's not antisocial behaviour, or, you know, squatting, or whatever it is, kids playing in the playground even though it should be closed off, and all that sort of thing. Thanks.
Regarding the faith schools, I think Jane just referenced that the fall in numbers is much greater in the C of E and the Catholics than in the maintained sort of secular community schools. But the Catholic schools have taken the greatest hits, about 58% down, I think. And probably that is a lot to do with Brexit, I think. So we, for the Catholic Church, they've got their own discussions they have to have about the schools that they're responsible for. In terms of the school and the maintenance, I assume the Catholic Church would have to look after it. It's not our responsibility because they own it. But there is an issue about maintaining the site at Tiverton, and there are going to be a lot of discussions, I'm sure, regarding the what happens to that site. But they haven't started. You know, there's nothing decided. We've got to get through all these other things first. Jane, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, just to say that you're absolutely right. The pressure on the faith schools is enormous. And when we went to meet with parents at St Peter and St Gildas last week, Peter Sweeney, who's the Director of Education at the diocese, acknowledged that he was being faced with falling rolls across London boroughs, and that there are an increasing number of Roman Catholic schools that we're having to consult on the future of. And then in terms of the maintenance of the site, as Councillor Brabazon said, this is a diocese responsibility, but I will take an action to raise that. In terms of sites generally, what you'll know that Stamford Hill has got sentinels. It's got a security presence there at all times. And obviously we would need to do exactly the same with any other sites that we were responsible for, to ensure that they were not discarded and were looked after properly and secure.
So if we can move to the resolution as set out in 3.1 of the report, page 589. Do we all agree? Thank you. Item 18, minutes of other bodies. Can we please note the minutes of Cabinet member sign-ins from pages 647 to 670? And also, can we note the minutes of other bodies? Item 19, new items of urgent business. There are no new items of urgent business. So if I can move to item 20, which is exclusion of the press and public. So item 21 allows for consideration of exempt information in relation to item 13. So can I move that the press and public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting to consider exempt information as defined under paragraphs 3 and 5, part 1, schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Do we all agree? Okay, so I'm formally closing the public section of the meeting.